Sleep is not a passive state where your brain simply shuts off until morning. It's one of the most metabolically and biologically active things your body does. And I want to spend this entire video walking through the actual biology underlying it, why sleep matters as much as it does, how your sleep is genuinely, meaningfully different from your partners or your coworkers, the specific stages your brain cycles through every single night, and the practical, evidence-based tools that fall directly out of understanding this biology properly. Let's start with why sleep matters at all, because I think it's worth grounding this conversation in the actual stakes before getting into the mechanics. Sleep affects nearly every system in your body simultaneously: your immune function, your metabolic and hormonal regulation, your cardiovascular health, your capacity to learn and consolidate memory, and your emotional regulation. And research examining sleep deprivation has found measurable impairment across every one of these domains, often after even a single night of significantly restricted sleep. Citation: this broad cross-system importance of sleep has been established extensively across sleep medicine research, summarized in reviews published in journals including Sleep Medicine Reviews and Nature Reviews, Neuroscience. Let's get into the actual architecture of sleep now, because understanding this structure is essential for everything that follows. Sleep isn't a single, uniform state. It's organized into distinct stages that your brain cycles through repeatedly across the night, broadly divided into two major categories: non-REM sleep and REM sleep, REM standing for rapid eye movement, named for the characteristic darting eye movements that occur during this stage. Citation: this fundamental division of sleep into non-REM and REM stages is foundational sleep neuroscience, established through decades of polysomnographic research and described extensively in sleep medicine literature. Non-REM sleep itself is further divided into stages, typically labeled N1 through N3, representing progressively deeper levels of sleep, while REM sleep represents a genuinely distinct state with its own characteristic brain activity pattern and physiological signature. Across a typical night, you don't simply progress linearly through these stages once and then stay in the deepest stage until waking. You cycle through them repeatedly, with each full cycle lasting roughly 90 minutes, and the composition of each cycle shifting considerably across the night, deep, slow-wave non-REM sleep dominating the earlier cycles, and REM sleep becoming progressively longer and more prominent in the cycles closer to morning. Citation: this cyclical architecture of sleep across the night, with its shifting balance between non-REM and REM stages, has been established through extensive polysomnographic research described in sleep medicine and chronobiology literature. This is genuinely important practical context. It means the first half of your night and the second half of your night are doing meaningfully different biological work, and truncating your sleep from either end costs you a disproportionate amount of one specific type of sleep rather than simply a proportional amount of everything. Let me address individual variation in sleep now, since this is genuinely one of the more important and I think underappreciated pieces of this entire conversation. Sleep need varies considerably between individuals, and research has found genuine, measurable genetic contributions to this variation, including identified gene variants associated with naturally shorter sleep need in a small subset of the population, sometimes called natural short sleepers, who function well on considerably less sleep than the general population without the same accumulated deficits most people would experience under equivalent restriction. Citation: this genetic basis for natural short sleep, including specific identified gene variants, has been established in research published in journals including Science and Neuron. Though I want to be genuinely clear, this represents a genuinely rare population, and the vast majority of people who believe they function well on considerably less than 7 hours nightly are not actually natural short sleepers. They're simply adapted to chronic sleep debt in a way that masks but doesn't eliminate its accumulated costs. Let me address sex differences in sleep specifically now, since this deserves genuine, dedicated treatment. Research has found meaningful differences between men and women across several dimensions of sleep. Women, on average, show somewhat greater amounts of deep, slow-wave sleep compared to men of the same age. And research has found that women's sleep architecture and sleep need appear to shift meaningfully across the menstrual cycle and across major reproductive life stages, including pregnancy and menopause, with hormonal fluctuations, particularly in progesterone and estrogen, directly affecting sleep quality and architecture during these periods. Citation: this research on sex differences in sleep architecture and the effects of reproductive hormonal fluctuations on sleep has been examined extensively in sleep medicine research, published in journals including Sleep Medicine Reviews and the Journal of Clinical Sleep Medicine. Some research has also found that women may require, or at least benefit from, somewhat more total sleep on average than men, though this specific claim remains an active area of ongoing research rather than fully, definitively settled. Let me bring in a practical tool here now, directly relevant to something an enormous number of people experience: difficulty falling back asleep after waking during the night, sometimes escalating into genuine insomnia. Sleep research and cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia specifically, one of the most rigorously validated treatments for chronic sleep difficulty, has consistently found that lying in bed, awake, anxious, and frustrated about not sleeping actually reinforces and strengthens the association your brain builds between your bed and wakefulness rather than sleep. And the evidence-based recommendation, when you've been lying awake for roughly 25 minutes or more without falling back asleep, is to actually get out of bed, go to a different room, and engage in a calm, low stimulation activity in dim lighting until you feel genuinely sleepy again, then return to bed. Citation: this stimulus control technique, part of cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, has been established extensively in sleep medicine research and represents one of the most consistently effective evidence-based interventions for chronic sleep difficulty, published in reviews in Sleep Medicine Reviews. This directly counters the common intuitive instinct to simply stay in bed and wait, which research suggests actually makes the underlying problem worse over time by strengthening exactly the wrong association. Let me go deeper into the specific non-REM sleep stages now, since I think this deserves genuinely careful individual treatment. Stage N1 represents the lightest stage of sleep, the transition between wakefulness and genuine sleep, typically lasting only a few minutes. And it's during this specific stage that a large portion of people experience hypnagogic jerks, the sudden involuntary muscle twitch, sometimes accompanied by a sensation of falling, that many people have experienced right as they're drifting off. Citation: this hypnagogic jerk phenomenon during the N1 sleep transition has been examined in sleep neuroscience research with proposed explanations, including the brain's reticular activating system briefly misinterpreting the relaxation of muscles during sleep onset as an actual physical fall, triggering a corrective, protective muscular response. Though, I want to be clear, this specific explanatory mechanism remains somewhat more theoretical than fully definitively confirmed. Stage N2 represents a deeper stage characterized by specific brainwave patterns called sleep spindles and K-complexes, and it typically makes up the largest total proportion of your night's sleep overall. Let me spend real dedicated time now on stage N3, deep, slow wave sleep, since I think this is genuinely one of the most important and most functionally significant stages we'll discuss throughout this entire video. This stage is characterized by slow, high-amplitude brain waves, and it's during this specific stage that the majority of your body's physical restoration and repair processes are concentrated, including the substantial release of growth hormone we'll discuss in more detail shortly, and the peak activity of the glymphatic system, the brain's waste clearance process we discussed in a previous video, which becomes considerably more active during deep sleep, specifically clearing metabolic waste products, including amyloid beta from brain tissue. Citation: this concentration of physical restoration processes and glymphatic clearance activity, specifically during deep slow-wave sleep, has been established extensively in sleep neuroscience research published in journals including Science and Sleep Medicine Reviews. Deep sleep tends to be concentrated disproportionately in the earlier portion of the night, which is precisely why truncating sleep from the beginning of the night, staying up unusually late, for instance, tends to cost you a disproportionate amount of this specific physically restorative stage. Now let's talk about REM sleep in genuine depth, since I think this stage deserves particularly careful, dedicated treatment given how distinct and frankly bizarre its underlying physiology actually is. During REM sleep, your brain activity pattern actually resembles wakefulness considerably more closely than it resembles the slower brainwave patterns of deep non-REM sleep. And this is also the stage most strongly associated with vivid, narratively complex, often genuinely bizarre dreaming, citation, this wakefulness-like brain activity pattern during REM sleep, and its strong association with vivid dreaming has been established extensively in sleep neuroscience research. What's genuinely remarkable, and I think underappreciated, about REM sleep specifically, is that your body actively paralyzes most of your voluntary skeletal muscles during this stage, a state called REM atonia, mediated by specific brainstem circuitry that actively inhibits motor neurons throughout your body, essentially preventing you from physically acting out the vivid, often physically active content of your dreams. Citation: this REM atonia mechanism, mediated by specific brainstem circuitry actively inhibiting motor output during REM sleep, has been established extensively in sleep neuroscience research, published in journals including Nature Reviews Neuroscience. I want to address the falling sensation and hypnic jerk connection here more directly, since it connects to something a lot of people specifically want explained, the experience of dreaming you're falling and then jolting awake. This experience relates to the transitional state between wakefulness and sleep we discussed earlier with hypnagogic jerks, though the specific narrative content, the dream of falling itself, appears to reflect your brain's attempt to construct a coherent narrative explanation for the sudden physical sensation of the muscular jerk occurring during this transition citation. This relationship between hypnagogic jerks and the accompanying subjective experience of falling has been discussed in sleep neuroscience literature on parasomnias and sleep onset phenomena. I also want to mention sleep paralysis specifically here, a genuinely distinct, though related, phenomenon where someone briefly wakes up while the REM atonia muscle paralysis mechanism we just discussed hasn't yet fully deactivated, producing a frightening but generally benign experience of being conscious but temporarily unable to move. Citation: this sleep paralysis phenomenon, reflecting a brief mismatch between waking consciousness and persisting REM-related muscle atonia, has been established extensively in sleep medicine research. Let me bring in a practical tool now regarding body position in sleep, since I think this is genuinely useful, actionable information. Research has found that sleeping position can meaningfully affect both sleep quality and specific health outcomes. Side sleeping specifically has been associated in research with more effective glymphatic clearance compared to back sleeping and side sleeping, particularly on the left side, has been recommended specifically during pregnancy, given research on optimizing blood flow, citation. This research on sleep position and its relationship to glymphatic clearance efficiency has been examined in sleep neuroscience research published in the Journal of Neuroscience. Let me address snoring and sleep apnea directly now, since this represents a genuinely important and I think underdiagnosed health issue relevant to an enormous number of people. Snoring occurs when airflow through your upper airway becomes partially obstructed during sleep, causing surrounding tissue to vibrate, and while occasional mild snoring is common and generally not concerning on its own, loud, chronic snoring, particularly when accompanied by witnessed breathing pauses, gasping, or excessive daytime sleepiness despite adequate time in bed, can indicate obstructive sleep apnea, a condition involving repeated, complete, or partial airway obstruction during sleep, producing repeated drops in blood oxygen levels and repeated brief arousals, often without the person ever becoming consciously aware they're happening. Citation: this distinction between benign snoring and clinically significant obstructive sleep apnea and its characteristic symptoms has been established extensively in sleep medicine literature. We touched on this condition in a previous video regarding its relationship to accelerated cellular aging, and it's worth repeating here directly. Untreated sleep apnea carries genuine, significant cardiovascular and metabolic health risks, and if you or a partner have noticed these specific warning signs, proper clinical evaluation, potentially including a formal sleep study, represents genuinely important, actionable next steps rather than something to dismiss as simply loud, harmless snoring. Let me address yawning now, since I think this represents a genuinely interesting phenomenon that most people have never had properly scientifically explained to them. Despite yawning being one of the most universally recognized human behaviors, its precise underlying function remains somewhat debated within sleep and behavioral science research, with the leading current theory proposing that yawning functions as a brain cooling mechanism, with the deep inhalation and jaw stretch involved in a yawn, increasing blood flow and promoting heat exchange that helps cool brain temperature, specifically citation. This brain cooling theory of yawning function has been examined in research published in Physiology and Behavior, supported by research finding that yawning frequency varies with ambient temperature in a pattern consistent with this cooling function. I want to address contagious yawning specifically here as well, since it's genuinely one of the more curious pieces of this phenomenon. Research has found that observing someone else yawn reliably triggers yawning in a substantial portion of observers, with some research connecting this contagion effect to the same mirror neuron and action observation systems we discussed in our previous video on martial arts expertise, and other research finding that susceptibility to contagious yawning correlates with measures of social bonding and empathy, citation. This contagious yawning phenomenon and its proposed connections to mirror neuron systems and social bonding has been examined in behavioral neuroscience research published in journals including PLOS One. Let me address the afternoon dip now, something an enormous number of people experience and often misinterpret entirely. Most people experience a genuine, measurable dip in alertness in the early to mid-afternoon, and while this is frequently, understandably attributed purely to eating lunch, the postprandial or after-meal dip, research has found that this alertness dip actually reflects a genuine built-in circadian rhythm pattern occurring roughly 8 hours after your typical wake time, largely independent of whether you've eaten a meal at all, though a large carbohydrate-heavy meal can meaningfully compound and worsen this naturally occurring dip, citation. This circadian basis for the afternoon alertness dip, occurring independent of meal timing, though compounded by large meals, has been established in chronobiology research published in journals including Sleep and the Journal of Sleep Research. This is genuinely useful context. The dip you feel in the early afternoon isn't purely or even primarily food coma. It's a genuine built-in feature of your daily biological rhythm that would occur to some meaningful degree even on an empty stomach. Let me bring in something about sleep across the animal kingdom and its evolutionary context here as well, since I think this offers genuinely useful, broader perspective on why sleep exists as a behavior at all. Sleep or sleep-like states involving reduced responsiveness and characteristic changes in neural activity has been documented across an extraordinarily broad range of species, from mammals and birds through to organisms as evolutionarily distant as jellyfish, which lack a centralized brain entirely, suggesting sleep, or some ancestral precursor to it, represents an extremely ancient, deeply conserved biological process, citation. This cross-species prevalence of sleep or sleep-like states, extending even to organisms lacking centralized nervous systems, has been documented in comparative sleep biology research, published in journals including Current Biology. Given that sleep involves genuine costs, reduced awareness of predators and environmental threats being an obvious one, its persistence across such an extraordinarily broad range of species across evolutionary history strongly suggests it serves functions important enough to outweigh those genuine survival costs, reinforcing the broader theme we opened this video with regarding just how biologically important this state actually is. Now let's talk about the actual health consequences of poor sleep in genuine depth, since I think grounding the why this matters conversation in specific, concrete research adds real weight here. Sleep deprivation research has found measurable impairment in immune function following even short-term sleep restriction, with one notable study finding that individuals sleeping fewer than 6 hours nightly were considerably more likely to develop a cold following deliberate viral exposure compared to those sleeping 7 hours or more. Citation. Prather and colleagues, this research on sleep duration and susceptibility to developing a cold following deliberate viral exposure was published in Sleep. We've discussed extensively across previous videos the relationship between sleep and testosterone, sleep and cellular aging, sleep and cardiorespiratory training adaptation, and sleep and brain health specifically. And I want to bring all of that together here. Chronic sleep restriction produces measurable negative effects across essentially every physiological system this entire channel has covered: hormonal regulation, cardiovascular health, metabolic health, cognitive function, and emotional regulation. Let me address the flip side of this directly now: the genuinely positive effects of good sleep, since I think this deserves equal, dedicated emphasis rather than only discussing the costs of deprivation. Adequate, consistent sleep has been associated with improved immune function, better emotional regulation and mood stability, improved memory consolidation and learning, better appetite regulation, and improved metabolic and cardiovascular health markers. Citation: this broad range of positive health associations with adequate sleep has been established extensively across sleep medicine research, summarized in reviews in Sleep Medicine Reviews. Let me address the specific mood connection here in a bit more depth, since sleep and emotional regulation, connecting directly to our previous video on this exact topic, are genuinely tightly linked. Research has found that sleep deprivation produces measurably increased amygdala reactivity to negative emotional stimuli, alongside reduced prefrontal regulatory connectivity to that same amygdala, essentially the exact same regulatory circuitry we discussed extensively in our emotion regulation video, meaning inadequate sleep genuinely, mechanistically compromises your capacity for effective emotional regulation. Citation: you and colleagues. This research demonstrating increased amygdala reactivity and reduced prefrontal amygdala connectivity following sleep deprivation was published in Current Biology. Let me address appetite and weight regulation specifically now as well, since this connects directly to metabolism content we've covered extensively elsewhere on this channel. Sleep restriction has been consistently found in research to increase levels of ghrelin, the hormone that stimulates hunger, while decreasing leptin, the hormone that signals satiety, helping explain why poor sleep is so consistently associated with increased caloric intake and weight gain, independent of any change in physical activity. Citation: this relationship between sleep restriction and altered ghrelin and leptin levels has been established extensively in sleep and metabolic research and foundational work, including research published in PNAS. Let me address beauty sleep directly now, since I think this popular phrase turns out to have genuine, if somewhat different, scientific grounding than most people assume. Research examining sleep-deprived individuals has found that independent, blinded observers reliably rate sleep-deprived faces as looking more tired, less healthy, and less attractive compared to the same individuals' faces following adequate sleep, with specific, measurable changes including more visible eye swelling, darker circles under the eyes, paler skin, and more downturned mouth corners. Citation: Axelson and colleagues. This research on observer-rated appearance differences following sleep deprivation was published in the BMJ. This isn't simply subjective folk wisdom. It's a genuinely documented, measurable, and reliably observed phenomenon. Let me bring in a genuinely important practical tool now, one I think deserves real, dedicated emphasis given how directly actionable it is. Sleep researchers commonly use a framework sometimes summarized by the acronym QQRT, standing for quantity, quality, regularity, and timing, as the four core dimensions that together determine how well your sleep is actually serving you. Citation: this multidimensional framework for evaluating sleep, encompassing quantity, quality, regularity, and timing as distinct, individually important dimensions, has been discussed extensively in sleep medicine and chronobiology literature. Quantity refers simply to total sleep duration, generally recommended at 7 to 9 hours nightly for the majority of adults. Quality refers to how continuous and undisturbed your sleep actually is, since frequent brief awakenings can substantially undermine the benefit of an otherwise adequate total sleep duration. Let me address regularity specifically now, since I think this deserves genuine emphasis given some genuinely striking recent research. A large study using wearable device data found that sleep regularity, meaning consistency in your sleep and wake timing from night to night, was actually more strongly associated with mortality risk than total sleep duration itself. Citation: this research finding sleep regularity as a stronger mortality predictor than sleep duration alone was published in PLOS Medicine, examining wearable-derived sleep data across a large cohort. I think this finding deserves genuine emphasis because it directly challenges a common assumption that simply averaging 7 or 8 hours across a week, even with considerable night-to-night variation, is functionally equivalent to consistently sleeping that same amount every single night. The research suggests it genuinely isn't. Let me address timing and chronotypes now, since this connects to genuine, meaningful individual variation worth understanding. Chronotype refers to your natural, biologically preferred sleep and wake timing, ranging along a spectrum, often informally described using morning lark and night owl as shorthand. And research has found this represents a genuine, measurable biological trait with meaningful genetic contribution, rather than simply a matter of habit or preference, citation. This genetic and biological basis for individual chronotype variation has been established in chronobiology research published in journals including Nature Communications. Research has also found associations between certain chronotypes, particularly a strong evening chronotype, and elevated risk for insomnia and certain mood disorders, likely reflecting the genuine mismatch that frequently occurs between a naturally late biological rhythm and the conventional, earlier-oriented schedule that work and school demands typically impose. Citation: this relationship between evening chronotype and elevated insomnia and mood disorder risk has been examined in chronobiology and psychiatric research published in journals including JAMA Psychiatry. Let me address shift work specifically here as well, connecting to research we've referenced in previous videos. Since this represents one of the more extreme and genuinely consequential real-world tests of circadian disruption. Chronic shift work, particularly rotating schedules that repeatedly force your sleep timing against your natural circadian rhythm, has been associated with a genuinely broad range of negative health outcomes, including elevated cardiovascular disease risk, elevated risk of certain cancers, sufficient that the World Health Organization's Cancer Research Agency has formally classified shift work involving circadian disruption as a probable human carcinogen, and elevated metabolic disease risk. Citation: this formal classification of shift work as a probable carcinogen and the broader range of associated health risks has been established by the International Agency for Research on Cancer and summarized in subsequent chronobiology and occupational health research. Let me bring in a practical tool now regarding sleep testing and monitoring, since I think this deserves genuine direct treatment. Consumer wearable devices increasingly offer sleep tracking, and while we discussed some genuine accuracy limitations of these devices in previous videos, they remain genuinely useful for tracking broad trends over time, total sleep duration, bedtime, and wake time consistency, rather than treating any single night's precise stage breakdown as perfectly accurate. Let me also address the specific tool of alarm clock timing here, given how directly it connects to the sleep cycle architecture we discussed earlier. Since sleep occurs in roughly 90-minute cycles, waking during a lighter stage of sleep, rather than abruptly interrupted from deep, slow-wave sleep, tends to produce a considerably less groggy, more comfortable waking experience, which is the underlying principle behind sleep cycle tracking alarm apps designed to wake you during a lighter sleep phase within a chosen window. Citation: this relationship between sleep stage at the moment of waking and subjective grogginess has been examined in sleep research on sleep inertia, published in journals including Sleep Medicine Reviews. Let me address microsleeps and nodding off here as well, since I think this deserves genuine direct warning given the real safety stakes involved. A microsleep is a brief, involuntary episode of sleep, sometimes lasting only a few seconds, that can occur when someone is genuinely sleep deprived, even while they believe themselves to be fully awake and functioning. And research has found microsleeps to be a significant, well-documented contributing factor in a substantial proportion of serious vehicle accidents, specifically, citation, this microsleep phenomenon and its documented contribution to drowsy driving accidents has been examined extensively in sleep and transportation safety research published in journals including Accident Analysis and Prevention. This is genuinely serious, practical safety information. Chronic sleep restriction doesn't simply make you feel tired. It creates genuine risk of brief, involuntary loss of consciousness that you may not even be aware is happening. Let me address sleep inertia directly now, since it connects usefully to the alarm timing discussion. Sleep inertia refers to the specific period of grogginess, impaired cognitive performance, and disorientation that occurs immediately upon waking, typically lasting anywhere from a few minutes up to as long as 30 minutes or more, particularly when waking from deep, slow-wave sleep specifically. Citation: this sleep inertia phenomenon and its relationship to the specific sleep stage someone is woken from has been established extensively in sleep neuroscience research. Now let's move into what actually causes sleepiness and wakefulness at a genuinely mechanistic biological level, since I think this deserves careful, dedicated treatment to close out this video properly. Two largely independent processes govern when you feel sleepy and when you feel alert. Your circadian rhythm, the roughly 24-hour internal biological clock, centered in a brain region called the suprachiasmatic nucleus that regulates the timing of sleepiness and alertness across the day, and sleep pressure, sometimes called the homeostatic sleep drive, which builds up progressively the longer you've been awake. Citation: this two-process model of sleep regulation, combining circadian rhythm and homeostatic sleep pressure as largely independent contributing systems, is foundational sleep science established through decades of chronobiology research. Let me address the specific molecular basis for sleep pressure now, since I think this deserves genuine, direct explanation. Sleep pressure is driven substantially by the gradual accumulation of a molecule called adenosine within your brain across your waking hours, with adenosine levels rising progressively the longer you remain awake and then clearing during sleep. Citation: this adenosine-based mechanism underlying homeostatic sleep pressure has been established extensively in sleep neuroscience research published in journals, including Physiological Reviews. This offers a genuinely useful mechanistic explanation for why caffeine works the way it does, something we touched on in a previous video on dopamine. Caffeine functions primarily by blocking adenosine receptors, essentially masking your brain's perception of accumulated sleep pressure rather than genuinely eliminating the underlying accumulated adenosine itself, which is precisely why sleepiness and the caffeine crash phenomenon often return, sometimes with amplified intensity, once the caffeine's effect on those adenosine receptors wears off and the actual still accumulated adenosine reasserts its effect. Let me bring in a practical tool now regarding growth hormone and deep sleep, specifically connecting directly back to something we mentioned earlier in this video. Growth hormone release follows a genuinely pulsatile pattern across the day, but the largest single pulse occurs specifically during your first period of deep, slow-wave sleep early in the night. Citation: this concentration of the largest daily growth hormone pulse, specifically within early deep sleep, has been established extensively in endocrinology and sleep research. This connects directly to practical themes we've discussed across previous videos on muscle building and recovery, since growth hormone plays a genuine role in tissue repair and recovery processes, meaning consistently truncating or disrupting your early night deep sleep, specifically staying up considerably later than your body's natural sleep onset timing, may be undermining this specific hormonal pulse in a way that a delayed but equally long total sleep duration might not fully compensate for. Let me address cortisol and its relationship to your circadian rhythm here as well, since I think this deserves genuine, careful treatment given how frequently it's discussed and sometimes misunderstood in popular content. Cortisol follows a well-defined, healthy circadian pattern, typically rising sharply in the 30 to 45 minutes immediately following natural waking, a specific phenomenon called the cortisol awakening response, before gradually declining across the remainder of the day, reaching its lowest point around midnight. Citation: this cortisol awakening response and its broader circadian pattern has been established extensively in psychoneuroendocrinology research, published in journals including Psychoneuroendocrinology. I want to address the popular phrase tired but wired directly here, since I think it deserves genuine mechanistic explanation. This common experience, feeling genuinely exhausted while simultaneously unable to fall asleep, often reflects a disrupted cortisol pattern, specifically elevated cortisol at a time of day, typically evening, when it should naturally be declining, frequently driven by chronic stress, late caffeine intake, or irregular sleep and wake timing, disrupting the normal circadian entrainment of this hormonal rhythm. Citation: this relationship between disrupted evening cortisol elevation, and the subjective experience of being simultaneously exhausted and unable to sleep has been discussed in psychoneuroendocrinology and sleep medicine research examining cortisol dysregulation and insomnia. Let me bring this entire considerably long conversation together now into a clear, comprehensive summary. Sleep is organized into a genuinely distinct architecture of non-REM and REM stages, each serving genuinely different physiological functions: deep, slow-wave sleep concentrated in the early night driving, physical restoration, growth hormone release, and glymphatic waste clearance, and REM sleep concentrated later in the night, involving a wakefulness-like brain state paired with active muscular paralysis and vivid, complex dreaming. Individual sleep need varies, genuinely shaped by genetics, sex, and chronotype, and is governed by two largely independent processes: your circadian rhythm and the adenosine-driven homeostatic sleep pressure that builds the longer you're awake. Chronic disruption to this system, whether through insufficient total sleep, irregular timing, misaligned chronotype demands, or conditions like sleep apnea, produces measurable, wide-ranging negative consequences across your immune function, emotional regulation, metabolic health, and appearance, while consistent, adequate, well-timed sleep supports genuine, measurable improvement across every one of those same domains. And the practical tools this biology directly supports, getting out of bed during prolonged nighttime wakefulness rather than lying in frustrated anticipation, prioritizing consistent sleep and wake timing as much as total duration, understanding your own chronotype rather than fighting it unnecessarily, and taking snoring and excessive daytime sleepiness seriously as potential signs of sleep apnea, all follow directly and logically from the underlying biology we've walked throughout this entire video. This video discusses general sleep science and biology for informational and educational purposes only and does not constitute personalized medical advice. If you're experiencing chronic insomnia, excessive daytime sleepiness, loud snoring, or witness breathing pauses during sleep, please consult a qualified physician or sleep specialist who can provide proper evaluation and consider a formal sleep study if clinically indicated. If you found this useful, subscribing and leaving a rating helps this channel reach more people, and I read through comments and feedback regularly to help shape future videos, so let me know what topics you'd like covered next. Let me add considerably more depth here, expanding on several threads that deserve fuller treatment. I want to go deeper into the specific brainwave patterns characterizing each sleep stage, since I think naming the actual electrophysiological signatures adds genuine precision to what we've discussed so far. During stage N1, the lightest transitional stage, brain activity shifts from the alpha waves, characteristic of relaxed wakefulness, toward theta waves, a slower frequency pattern. Stage N2, the stage making up the largest proportion of total sleep time, is specifically defined by two distinctive electrophysiological events: sleep spindles, brief bursts of oscillatory brain activity in a specific frequency range, and K complexes, large singular waveforms that appear to occur partly in response to external stimuli, even during sleep, potentially functioning as a kind of protective mechanism that suppresses arousal from minor environmental disturbances while preserving the capacity to wake from genuinely significant ones. Citation: this specific role of K complexes in potentially suppressing arousal from minor stimuli while preserving responsiveness to significant ones has been examined in sleep neuroscience research published in the Journal of Neuroscience. Sleep spindles specifically have also been found in research to correlate with memory consolidation capacity, with individuals showing greater spindle density and activity, generally demonstrating better performance on memory consolidation tasks following sleep. Citation: this relationship between sleep spindle activity during N2 sleep and memory consolidation performance has been examined extensively in sleep and memory research published in journals, including Nature Neuroscience. Let me bring in something about memory consolidation more broadly here, since I think this deserves fuller, dedicated treatment beyond the brief spindle mention, given how directly relevant it is to learning and performance. Research has found that different types of memory appear to be preferentially consolidated during different sleep stages. Procedural memory, the kind involved in motor skill learning we discussed in our previous video on martial arts expertise, appears to benefit particularly from REM sleep, while declarative memory, factual and episodic information, appears to benefit particularly from deep, slow-wave non-REM sleep specifically, citation, this differential relationship between sleep stage and the specific type of memory being consolidated has been established extensively in sleep and memory research, summarized in reviews published in Nature Reviews Neuroscience. This offers genuinely useful, practical context if you're specifically trying to consolidate a newly learned physical skill, a martial arts technique, a musical piece, adequate total sleep, and specifically adequate REM sleep, concentrated more heavily in the later portion of the night, appears to carry particular relevance while learning and retaining factual, declarative information may depend more heavily on the deep sleep concentrated earlier in the night. I want to spend real time now on the specific neurotransmitter systems governing the transition between wakefulness, non-REM sleep, and REM sleep, since I think this adds genuine mechanistic depth beyond simply describing the stages themselves. Wakefulness is maintained by several distinct neurotransmitter systems working together, including neurons releasing norepinephrine, serotonin, and histamine, all of which become progressively less active as you transition into non-REM sleep and become almost completely silent during REM sleep, specifically citation, this pattern of wake-promoting neurotransmitter systems progressively quieting through non-REM sleep and becoming nearly silent during REM has been established extensively in sleep neuroscience research published in journals including Nature Reviews Neuroscience. Meanwhile, acetylcholine-releasing neurons, which are relatively quiet during non-REM sleep, become highly active again during REM sleep, nearly as active as during wakefulness, which helps explain the wakefulness-like brain activity pattern we discussed earlier, characterizing this specific stage citation, this reactivation of cholinergic neurons during REM sleep, contributing to its wakefulness-like cortical activity pattern, has been established in sleep neuroscience research examining the neurochemical basis of REM sleep generation. Let me address something about the specific brainstem circuitry controlling the flip switch-like transitions between these sleep states here as well, since I think this represents a genuinely elegant piece of neuroscience worth understanding. Research has identified what's sometimes called a flip-flop switch model involving mutually inhibitory neural populations in the hypothalamus and brainstem that suppress each other's activity, meaning the system tends to exist in one of two relatively stable states, fully awake or fully asleep, rather than lingering indefinitely in an unstable intermediate state citation. This flip-flop switch model of sleep-wake transition involving mutually inhibitory neural populations has been established through foundational sleep neuroscience research published in journals including Nature and subsequent work examining the specific hypothalamic and brainstem circuitry involved. This connects to something genuinely relevant given our earlier discussion of sleep inertia and the grogginess of waking mid-cycle. When this switch mechanism becomes destabilized, whether through waking abruptly from deep sleep, through disrupted sleep architecture from conditions like sleep apnea, or through irregular sleep timing more broadly, you're more likely to experience this kind of unstable intermediate state, precisely the subjective experience of grogginess and impaired functioning that sleep inertia represents. Let me bring in something about napping here as well, since I think this deserves genuine, dedicated treatment given how commonly it comes up in practical sleep discussions. Research on napping has found that shorter naps, generally in the range of 10 to 20 minutes, tend to produce measurable improvements in alertness and cognitive performance without producing significant sleep inertia upon waking, since naps of this duration generally don't allow enough time to progress into deep, slow-wave sleep, while longer naps, particularly those extending beyond 30 minutes, carry considerably greater risk of waking from deeper sleep stages, producing more pronounced sleep inertia and grogginess. Citation, this research comparing shorter and longer nap durations and their differential effects on subsequent alertness and sleep inertia, has been examined extensively in sleep research published in journals including Sleep Medicine Reviews. I want to address timing here as well. Since napping too late in the afternoon can meaningfully reduce the accumulated sleep pressure, the adenosine buildup we discussed earlier, that's needed to fall asleep easily at your normal bedtime, meaning naps taken earlier in the day, and kept appropriately brief tend to provide the alertness benefit with considerably less risk of interfering with subsequent nighttime sleep. Let me address something about temperature regulation and sleep here as well. Connecting to themes we discussed in a previous video on zone 2 training and mitochondrial adaptation, but focused specifically on sleep architecture here. Your core body temperature naturally begins declining in the evening as part of the biological process of preparing for sleep. And research has found that this temperature decline is directly mechanistically linked to sleep onset, with a cooler sleep environment generally supporting easier sleep onset and more consolidated sleep, since it works with this natural temperature decline rather than against it. Citation, this relationship between declining core body temperature and sleep onset and the supportive role of a cooler sleep environment has been established extensively in thermoregulation and sleep research published in journals including Sleep Medicine Reviews. I want to bring in something about the counterintuitive mechanism behind why a hot bath or shower before bed can actually help with this specific process. Despite the seemingly contradictory logic, research has found that warming your skin through a hot bath or shower actually promotes subsequent heat loss through vasodilation, blood vessels near the skin surface expanding, which then accelerates the drop in core body temperature that naturally follows, essentially using a temporary warming to accelerate the cooling process your body needs for sleep onset, citation. This mechanism by which pre-sleep warm bathing promotes subsequent core temperature decline through vasodilation-mediated heat loss has been examined in sleep thermoregulation research published in Sleep Medicine Reviews. Let me bring in light exposure and its relationship to sleep here as well, since I think this deserves genuine, dedicated treatment given how directly it connects to the circadian rhythm conversation we had earlier. Light, particularly morning light exposure, functions as the primary environmental cue, sometimes called a Zeitgeber, meaning literally time giver, that entrains your circadian rhythm to the actual external 24-hour day. And research has found that specific photoreceptor cells in your retina, distinct from the rods and cones responsible for conscious visual perception, are specifically responsible for detecting this light signal and relaying it directly to your suprachiasmatic nucleus citation. This role of specialized non-visual photoreceptor cells in relaying light information directly to the circadian clock has been established extensively in chronobiology research published in journals including Science. This offers genuinely useful, practical context connecting directly to advice we've referenced across previous videos regarding morning light exposure, getting genuine, bright light exposure, ideally outdoor light, given its considerably greater intensity compared to typical indoor lighting, earlier in the day helps anchor and strengthen your circadian rhythm, which research has found supports both easier sleep onset at your intended bedtime and, connecting to our earlier cortisol discussion, a more robust, appropriately timed cortisol awakening response. Let me address alcohol and its relationship to sleep architecture specifically here now, since I think this deserves genuine, direct treatment given how commonly alcohol gets used inaccurately as a sleep aid. While alcohol does tend to reduce the time it takes to fall asleep, research has consistently found that it significantly disrupts sleep architecture across the remainder of the night, specifically suppressing REM sleep during the first half of the night, followed by a rebound increase in lighter, more fragmented sleep and more frequent awakenings during the second half, meaning alcohol genuinely degrades overall sleep quality even when it appears subjectively to help someone fall asleep more quickly. Citation, this disruptive effect of alcohol on sleep architecture, including REM suppression and subsequent rebound fragmentation, has been established extensively in sleep pharmacology research published in journals including Alcoholism, Clinical and Experimental Research. Let me bring in something about melatonin here as well, since I think this deserves careful, precise treatment given how widely used it's become as an over-the-counter sleep aid, often with somewhat inaccurate popular understanding of what it actually does. Melatonin is a hormone released by your pineal gland in response to darkness, and its primary biological function is signaling circadian timing information, essentially telling your body it's nighttime, rather than directly forcefully inducing sleep the way a sedative medication does. Citation, this signaling, rather than directly sedating, function of endogenous melatonin has been established extensively in chronobiology research. Research on melatonin supplementation has generally found it more effective for shifting circadian timing, helping with jet lag or delayed sleep phase issues, specifically than for simply improving sleep quality or duration in someone without a circadian timing problem. And research has also found considerable variability in the actual melatonin content of commercially available supplements relative to their labeled dosage, citation. This research finding considerable discrepancy between labeled and actual melatonin content in commercial supplements has been published in the Journal of Clinical Sleep Medicine, examining melatonin supplement quality control across commercially available products. Let me address exercise and its relationship to sleep here as well, connecting to extensive fitness content we've covered elsewhere on this channel, but focusing specifically on the sleep-relevant mechanisms here. Regular exercise has been consistently associated with improved sleep quality and reduced time to fall asleep, with research suggesting several contributing mechanisms, including exercise's role in regulating circadian rhythm, its effects on core body temperature that parallel the warm bath mechanism we discussed earlier, and its broader effects on reducing anxiety and depressive symptoms, both of which independently interfere with sleep quality, citation, this relationship between regular exercise and improved sleep quality, and its several proposed mechanisms has been examined extensively in exercise and sleep research published in journals including Sleep Medicine Reviews. I want to address the specific, commonly repeated concern about exercising too close to bedtime here as well, since more recent, careful research has actually found this concern to be somewhat overstated for most people, with meta-analyses finding that evening exercise, even performed within a few hours of bedtime, doesn't reliably impair subsequent sleep for the majority of individuals and may, in some cases, still provide net sleep benefit, though genuine individual variation exists and some people do find late, particularly vigorous, exercise disruptive to their own subsequent sleep. Specifically, citation, this more recent moderated evidence regarding evening exercise timing and its generally limited negative effect on subsequent sleep for most individuals has been examined in a meta-analysis published in Sports Medicine. Let me bring in something about screen use and blue light exposure before bed here as well, since I think this deserves genuinely careful, balanced treatment given how much popular attention and how much overstated claim making surrounds this specific topic. Research has found that blue light exposure specifically can suppress melatonin release and delay circadian timing, connecting directly to the photoreceptor and light signaling mechanisms we discussed earlier. Citation, this melatonin suppressing effect of blue light exposure has been established extensively in chronobiology research. That said, I want to be genuinely balanced here. Some more recent research examining screen use before bed more holistically has found that the specific content and emotional engagement of screen use, stimulating, engaging content that delays your intended bedtime or produces genuine emotional arousal, may matter as much as or more than the blue light exposure itself in many real-world contexts, meaning the popular focus purely on blue light filtering, while not without genuine mechanistic basis, likely represents an incomplete picture of why screen use before bed often interferes with sleep for a lot of people. Citation, this more holistic view, considering screen content and engagement alongside blue light exposure, specifically has been discussed in more recent sleep research examining the multiple contributing factors behind screen-associated sleep. Disruption. Let me bring this considerably expanded, thorough conversation to its actual final close now. Everything we've added in this deeper exploration, the specific electrophysiological signatures distinguishing each sleep stage, the differential relationship between sleep stage and the type of memory being consolidated, the neurochemical flip-flop switch governing stable transitions between wakefulness and sleep, evidence-based guidance on nap duration and timing, the genuine thermoregulatory mechanism behind both natural sleep onset and the counterintuitive benefit of pre-sleep warm bathing, the role of specialized retinal photoreceptors in circadian entrainment, alcohol's genuinely disruptive effect on sleep architecture despite its sedating feel, the more precise, signaling-focused understanding of what melatonin actually does biologically, the more nuanced, less alarmist current evidence on evening exercise timing, and a more complete picture of screen use before bed extending beyond blue light alone. All of it reinforces and deepens the central message this entire video has been built around. Sleep is a genuinely complex, precisely regulated biological process involving distinct stages, distinct neurotransmitter systems, and a delicate, individually variable balance between circadian timing and accumulated sleep pressure. And understanding this underlying biology, rather than simply following generic one-size-fits-all sleep advice, gives you the genuine tools to build a sleep practice that actually fits your own specific physiology, chronotype, and life circumstances. This video discusses general sleep science and biology for informational and educational purposes only and does not constitute personalized medical advice. If you're experiencing chronic insomnia, excessive daytime sleepiness, loud snoring, or witness breathing pauses during sleep, please consult a qualified physician or sleep specialist who can provide proper evaluation and consider a formal sleep study if clinically indicated.